Hello everybody, Joel here from Golf Monthly. I hope you're well and join me here at West Hill Golf Club for an ultimate distance irons comparison test. That's right, I've picked 8 of my favourite distance irons of 2019, put them together and tested them in various different situations to try and work out the pros and cons of each of the irons to help your buying decision if you're looking to upgrade your set in 2019 for a set that's going to give you a bit more distance. These are the 8 options I think you need to be considering. Now, as always, make sure you subscribe to the Golf Monthly YouTube channel to make sure you don't miss any of our equipment review videos. Click the like button, of course, if you like what you're watching, and comment on the video as well. Tell me which is your favourite distance iron of 2019 and which one are you most looking forward to trying this year. I'd love to hear from you. Right, so let's talk you through the 8 models I've got in this comparison test. First up is the Callaway Rogue X. This has a 7-iron loft of 27 degrees. Next up is the Cobra King F9 Speedback. This has a 7-iron loft of 29.5 degrees. The next iron I've got is the Honma Tour World 747P model. This 7-iron has a loft of 28.5 degrees. Next is the Mizuno JPX 919 Hot Metal. Now this has a 7-iron loft of 30 degrees. Next alphabetically is the Ping G410. Now this 7-iron has a loft of 30 degrees. Then we have the TaylorMade M6. This has a 7-iron loft of 28.5 degrees. Penultimate iron in the test is the Titleist 718 AP1. Now this has a 7-iron loft of 30 degrees. And last but by no means least is the Wilson Staff D7. This has a 7-iron loft of 28 degrees. So I'm sure you've noticed the shafts aren't exactly the same in each of the iron. These are just stock options in each of the models we've picked. Yes, there's some discrepancies with the makes and the models, but they're all standard stiff and they're all basically the same length, 37 inches long, apart from the Cobra and the Callaway, which are slightly longer, just over 37 inches. But basically they're all the same kind of flex of shaft and length as well. So hopefully you'll agree it's a relatively fair comparison test. Kind of some reasons why we didn't choose certain models. So we picked the Callaway Rogue X instead of the Rogue because the Rogue X is the strongest lofted 7-iron on the market. So in a distance irons test comparison video, I felt like it was right to include that model, and you'll appreciate it later on down the line, I think, why we've chosen this iron to give you some comparisons in terms of how it performs compared to some of these other models. A lot of you probably wondering where the Srixon is, the Srixon Z 585. Well, for me, it didn't really fit the kind of distance iron category. It's quite compact for me down behind the ball, and it has a 7-iron loft of 31 degrees, and I wasn't really looking for anything above 30 degrees for this irons test. So that's the 8 irons I've picked. I'm going to split this video into various different categories as always. But how do we go about testing these irons? Well, I hit an awful lot of shots at Foresight Sports HQ in Guildford on the GC Quad launch monitor. I basically hit a maximum of 15 shots with each iron, left with 10 counting shots with each iron. Didn't actually delete many shots at all with these clubs, but what I did delete was any gross mitts hits, so shanks and toe shanks and really bad strikes. I deleted those, not that I hit many. And I did also delete any shots that were above 15 yards offline. You'll notice when I tested these inside, did have some clubs down on the ground to make sure my ball position and alignment was consistent each time, just to try and make sure I delivered the club in exactly the same way. Obviously I'm not a robot, but I was just trying to give myself the best chance to do that. And then once I gathered the data at Foresight Sports HQ, I then came to West Hill on the range here and hit an awful lot of shots on the driving range with each of these irons to assess the sound, the feel, the ball fly, and also the turf interaction from the ground as well. So there's lots of different factors to consider when thinking about irons. Let's dive into the looks of these irons. Got a great degree of difference here between the looks of a lot of these irons. There's some fairly compact ones moving into some fairly chunky ones. Yeah, at the chunky end of the spectrum, so the Callaway Rogue X is right up there. It's got an extremely thick top line, quite a lot of offset. Double white scoreline does help you align the face, but if you're looking for maximum confidence over the ball, the Rogue X would certainly be one I'd choose. The other one I'd pick would probably be the Ping G410 if I can find it. This has one of the largest profiles down behind the ball, very long from heel to toe address, relatively thin top line, but does inspire a lot of confidence. And the other one that's also going to do that is the Honma Tour World 747P. Now, the interesting thing about this iron is that it has actually not much offset and a fairly thin top line, probably one of the thinnest top lines on test, but it does have one of the longest hitting areas from heel to toe. It's actually longer than the Ping G410. So if you're looking for a nice combination of kind of what looks like to be like a player's iron, but still lots of face behind the ball to hit, and to give you a little bit more margin for error on your strike, the Honma is definitely a good option to try. These wouldn't be the models that I would pick. I prefer something a little bit more classic, a little bit more simple down behind the ball, which is why I'd probably lean towards the Mizuno or the Titleist. Both of these very simple, classic looking irons, not much to distract you down behind the ball. I like the darker finish on the Titleist. They just strike a nice balance of looking easy to hit without being oversized or chunky. There's not much offset there. It's still a relatively classic profile, but still looks inviting to hit. One thing I did notice with the Cobra and the Wilson is that both of these look pretty nice behind the ball, but you can see the back of the sole behind the top line. So if that's something that's going to put you off, it's going to be even more the case with as the irons get longer and the loft reduces, you're going to see more of that sole behind the top line. So just something to consider. If you had to push me for my favourite looking iron of the test, it probably would be the Mizuno JPX 919 Hot Metal, and just behind that would be the Titleist 718 AP1. Right, so the all-important performance category, or the distance category. Look, there's an awful lot of numbers to get through, and I don't think I'm able to talk through all of them, but I'll flash them up on your screen now so you can have a look at how each iron performed. You'll notice I've included things like clubhead speed and smash factor to kind of gain an understanding as to where the distance and performance might be coming from. Obviously, we'd expect the irons that have slightly stronger static loft to have higher smash factor readings. I've also included the shortest and longest shots as well as the average carry to kind of give you an idea of the consistency of each iron as well. I mean, going through the kind of average carry numbers, you'll notice that the Wilson Staff D7 is comfortably the longest iron on test, which is interesting because it actually has a slightly higher static loft than the Callaway Rogue X, which had an average carry of 189. So it was 6 yards further on average than the Callaway. You'll notice it has a lot lower spin, the Wilson does, under 4,000. It was the only iron to spin under 4,000, which is one of the reasons why it was the longest, and also for whatever reason the clubhead speed was slightly higher. But it was significantly higher than the other models from the test at 91.5. So again, that's another reason why the distance might be up. But it does have a slightly lightweight feel, that Wilson, so that might be a reason why I swung it a little bit faster and why you might swing it faster as well. In terms of ball speed, it was the fastest. Just behind it was the Callaway, and then not far behind it was the Honma and the Cobra and the TaylorMade. Those three were also very long. Interestingly, you'll notice the Cobra did have a higher smash factor reading at 1.39 over the TaylorMade M6, even though it has 1 degree weaker static loft, which I thought was an interesting observation, and the swing speeds were the same. So perhaps the Cobra King F9 is slightly more efficient at delivering ball speed when it comes to the same club speed, or maybe I struck the Cobra a little bit better. Definitely noticed the Cobra, in terms of like for like loft, I think it's definitely one of the fastest irons on test. An average carry of 185 was very impressive. Look, it's not surprising to see that the irons that had the strongest static loft went the furthest. You know, the irons with 30 degrees loft, so the Titleist, the Ping and the Mizuno, didn't go as far, but that is to be expected. Also wanted to kind of talk to you about the Honma club. That also gave me very good ball speed, and you'll notice it actually launched quite low, which was surprising because it has a tungsten weight running along the sole. You'd think that would help get the ball on up in the air, but I definitely noticed here testing it on the range, it did have a much more penetrating flight. You see, you had a peak height there on test of 29 yards. It was that and the Ping that definitely flighted the ball a little bit lower for me, which I was very surprised about, especially with the Ping, because you'll notice it has one of the highest launch angles. Maybe I didn't strike the Ping as well as some of the other clubs. The swing speed was also down with the Ping at 89, and that might have been contributing to the slightly lower ball flight we got on test and those shorter carry distances. In terms of launch, it was interesting. Yeah, the Ping did launch the highest, along with the Mizuno and the Titleist. Like I said, they're all 30 degrees static loft. But if you are looking for a higher ball flight, it doesn't necessarily mean that the irons with the high static loft will deliver that, because you notice there the TaylorMade M6 and the Cobra King F9 actually hit the ball the highest, even though their lofts are slightly stronger. So it's all about how the club is designed. You know, a lot of these game improvement irons do have super strong lofts because they're built to get the ball up in the air a lot more easily, and that was certainly the case with those two models, the TaylorMade and the Cobra, especially with the TaylorMade M6, because it does have one of the widest soles on test. But there's a clear winner in terms of out and out distance. You've got the Wilson Staff D7, and then just behind that you've got the Callaway Rogue X iron, and then just below that you've got irons like the Cobra, the Honma and the TaylorMade M6. So lots of distance options there to choose from, but the Wilson Staff D7 was the longest overall. So next up is forgiveness, and when we're thinking about forgiveness, I'm looking here at smash factor, I'm looking at dispersion, and I'm also looking at the consistency of the distance. So the difference between my shortest shot and my longest shot with each iron, you know, how consistent was the performance, how uniform was it? There was a couple that really stood out for me in terms of forgiveness in that area, and it was the Titleist AP1 and the TaylorMade M6. The TaylorMade M6 especially was very, very consistent. You'll notice I actually only had 3 yards difference between my shortest and my longest shot. So you see there 183 to 186 with an average carry of 185. That was incredibly consistent for a distance iron. I like the fact it goes quite high as well. It's peaking at 32 yards, and dispersion was just 2 yards to the right on average. The Titleist 718 AP1 was only just behind it, and surprisingly the Callaway Rogue X for me was actually pretty straight. Testing it here on the range, that's actually surprisingly easy to control, even though it has the lowest static loft of all the models. So they're all very forgiving, they've all got a lot of perimeter weighting, they're all fairly large in size. Testing on the range, I'd say the Ping definitely stood out for forgiveness. It's a very, very large club head, very difficult to miss-hit a shot or hit an especially bad shot with it. I like the shape of the sole with the Ping. It's got a little bit of camber at the back, just helps the club get through the turf a little bit quicker, and that's also the case with the Cobra as well. Even though it's actually quite wide, the part of the sole that comes into contact with the ground is quite narrow. It just helps you get through the turf a little bit quicker. If I had to pick a winner, it would definitely be between the TaylorMade M6 and the Titleist 718 AP1. In the value category, there really is only one clear winner, and that is the Wilson Staff D7 iron. Now this comes in at £469 for a set. I think it's 5 to sandwich it comes in. And for me, that's a no-brainer. It's almost half the price of a lot of these irons on test. And despite that, it has excellent performance. Yes, the lofts are very strong. And yes, it is quite a low spinning club. So, you know, game improvers might find that lower spin makes it a little bit more difficult to control. But that aside, I think there's a lot to admire and enjoy about this club. They're sleeking up the look. It's a lot cleaner now at address. There's a little bit of offset there. It's a fairly simple looking iron. There's no distractions. It feels really solid off the face, launches the ball surprisingly high for a 7 iron that's lofted so strong at 28 degrees. Got 3 rows of power holes helping with that, and it's also helping with the ball speed. So if you're looking for a new distance iron and you're wanting to save a few pounds, the Wilson Staff D7 is definitely the standout choice from this test. Right, so the overall verdict, it's a tough one because there's a lot to like about all these irons, and you know, anyone could pick any of these irons and they would be happy with the performance, but hopefully I've showcased some subtle differences between the irons that might influence your decision. So if you had to push me for an overall winner, look, this is a distance irons video, so the iron that went the furthest is the Wilson Staff D7. So technically that should be the winner, but my favourite iron of all of them in this test, covering everything that you could possibly think about, it would probably be the Titleist AP1. And this is arguably one of the better looking irons on test. I like the darker finish. It wasn't the longest by any means, but again, it was very consistent. I think you really need to think about, do you want to hit your iron shots further, or do you want to hit them a similar distance more often? What's going to help your game even more? And I think that's where this kind of iron might come into play, because it is very consistent. That front to back dispersion was very tight. Not quite as tight as M6, but still tighter than a lot of the other models on test. But it still offers enough distance for me, and I think a lot of you. It still looks relatively refined and sleek and classic, and it's not compact by any means. There's still a lot of meat behind the ball there, and for me kind of combines a little bit of everything. So that's why I'd probably pick the Titleist 718 AP1 as my overall favourite distance iron. You're probably wondering why I've picked that, because it didn't actually go as far as a lot of the other models, but you know, for me it's not all about distance, it's about consistency, it's about looks, it's about forgiveness, it's about overall performance and the feelings that I get when I set a club down behind the ball. Which one do I think I'm going to hit the best? And out on the range here, I definitely hit the best shots with the Titleist 718 AP1. So that's why I picked that. Look, I'd love to hear from you. Which would you pick based on the distance numbers that I flashed up earlier and the overall performance numbers? Which one really stood out for you in terms of having the performance that would benefit your game? I'd love to hear from you. Look, but that's it for now from me in terms of this distance irons test. Thanks for watching. From West Hill, it's goodbye.